Theme song for the Gear Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 26. Here we are. Uncle Leon, how you going, mate?
Pretty good, mate. And Troy, we are joined by Stephen Dawson today. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. How are you, mate?
My pleasure. No problem. I'm great. Yeah.
Now, people may be aware of you for several reasons, in fact. One, and this is called the Gear Podcast, so I'm sure we'll be talking about plenty of this, is that you worked for Marshall Amplification for a while. How many years were you there?
I was there from January 2005 to about September 2014.
That's pretty impressive.
So nearly 10 years.
Nearly 10 years, yeah. And you also play guitar in the reformed version of Geordie, who some people are no doubt aware of because of their original links to Brian Johnson. How long have you been doing that gig?
We started that in 2017 because Geordie was off the grid for a long time. They just sort of they put it on the back burner. And then we did. It was just a friend. I used to play with the Animals as well.
Oh wow!
And the agent who used to book us out as the Animals called me one day and said, "What's the Geordie boys doing?" I said, "I don't know. Let me find out." So I gave Tom Hill a ring, the bass player, and said, "Are you up for another round? One last final hurrah?" And he said yes. And he contacted Brian Gibson, the drummer. Obviously, the singer wasn't available. And the original guitarist who wrote all of the songs as well, he lives in Cyprus.
Oh, okay.
But he's still involved on that side of it. So he's still in the family and still writes and still is involved with recording.
That's awesome. So how often do you guys, how many gigs a year would you do with Geordie?
Well, we don't gig all of the time because obviously I've got my business and we tend to go out in the summer. For instance, we're doing a couple of festivals this month, one in Belgium, one in Kent here. We're doing the Half Moon in Putney, which is a well-known pub gig. And we tend to put gigs around the main anchor gigs. Mm-hmm. So we might do a gig every month, 2 gigs a month. We don't really want to do, it's not full time.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
None of us have got time to do it full time. So, and Terry has actually got his other band, which is called Kossoff, the band plays on, which is like, a nod to his other main band, So it's nice and easy. There's no high pressure. It's just, enjoyable.
Great.
So when you're not doing that, what else are you doing? Are you still building amps and repairing amps? And
yes. Yeah, I repair, service, modify, upgrade amplifiers. People send me amplifiers from all over Europe. It's mad, even just for a service. I get vintage moderns coming from Italy and things like that. And I says, just send it to a local guy. It's just a service. No.
It's got to go back to the dad.
Yeah, exactly. And we love a segue on this podcast, so that is the perfect segue. I'm aware of your work as an amp designer because of the Vintage Modern, which I no longer own, but it was one of my favorite amps that I did own, and a pretty unique for a modern Marshall, and it's in the name, the Vintage Modern. I did a bunch of videos with it on my channel in the early days of the channel, and they are still really popular. They've definitely got I would say like a cult following. If people know about that amp, then they're pretty passionately into it. So where along the line, we'll talk about the Marshall thing. Where along the line, how far into your stint at Marshall were you when you designed that amp?
Not too far in, actually. My first project with Marshall was, I don't know if you remember, the 40th anniversary, the dual output transformer.
What?
dual
know.
output transformer.
I'm aware of the 30th, but never the 40th.
Right. Well, the 40th anniversary was there wasn't very many of these originally, but in 1965, Pete Townsend asked Marshall for a louder amp because he was being drowned out by the crowd. So he said, I want twice the amount of speakers and I want twice the power of the amplifier. And Marshall thought, no, nobody's going to want that. We're not going to put that onto the catalogue. So what they did was they actually gave him a 100-watt amp, which used two 50-watt output transformers.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
And then they made a bunch of them for the Who, 6 of them, I think, for the Who. And then the Who went out with it, and an 8x12 cab. Which
that's a really infamous picture. I've seen that picture, and I'm aware of that part of the story. Mostly the cab.
I've seen that photo as well, and my being hurts looking at that. But I guess from that's where you get the iconic, A and B cabinet stacked on top of each other, right?
It kind of evolved from that, yes, when the roadies started complaining. And then there was only 6 made for the Who and 6 made for the small faces. Yeah, so there's a guy who brought in an amp which had JH100 on it, and it was verified as belonging to Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
Back in the day. These amps have got a different sound from the EL34, a typical Marshall evolution, And I thought it'd be nice to just have these with some of the features of later Marshalls. And then at the time, the flagship project was the JVM.
Mm-hmm.
And Santiago was doing that. So, Santiago is highly qualified engineer, much more highly qualified than I am. I'm more of a tonal architect, searching for the so they gave the JVM project here, and we said, well, what happens if people don't want an amp with loads and loads of features on it? There's still a lot of people who like the old, So that was me. If people didn't want that, they wouldn't go to another company.
Mm-hmm.
They'd stay with Marshall and go for the alternative. So I think someone called it, it was going to be a Vox killer. Because Vox was distributed by Korg, who was in America, who also distributed Marshall.
Oh, okay.
And it was just from that point of view, I love Vox SC30s, so I didn't like that term. And anyway, I just started setting about, and I thought, one of the things, the JH100 was a very humbucker-friendly amp, but not single coils.
That bright in there. Oof.
It's just got, it hasn't got a bottom end, and it's too sharp, and there was no way to dial it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I'm going to put something on a much better system for dialing. It's a bit like linking the inputs, but it's a bit more sophisticated than that. So you could play with any guitar, so no guitarist could complain it doesn't suit my guitar. There's people with Gretches, everything,
great machines. So obviously what you're referencing there are the, I think a lot of people who have played non-master volume Marshalls are familiar with, you have the 4 inputs and each channel has a control, but then you bridge them and you can kind of balance them, which it's such a sound, right? But what were the controls called? Were they body and detail?
Body and detail.
Yeah. So how did you come up with those, and what exactly do they do? Because they're obviously inspired by that, but in my experience with the amp, it was its own thing.
Yeah. The names of those controls, actually Santiago came up with those names.
Oh, right.
I think I had called it girth and something else.
Girth.
in the development process. Something.
That's so funny because I had, unrelated, I'm sure you're aware of Cherrytone and Nick making apps in Malaysia, and I had him make me like a hot rodded Marshall thing, and I was like, oh, can you put a negative feedback pot on there so I can play around with that? And he was like, yeah, what do you want to call it? And I was like, let's call it girth. So the amp has a girth control in there, and it's like I'd highly approve of that. But again, putting that on an amp, I can see why they went with what they went with.
It's. I mean, I wasn't that precious about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I just, as long as it's sort of like it was, appropriate for what it did, and the that side of it, the body control, it actually literally does just do the low harmonics, and it's rolled off on the top end, so it doesn't give it. Whereas the old Plexis, they still got the top end too,
Yep.
And the higher one rolls off on the bottom, so you kind of, it's like a crossover.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, interesting. Because I noticed it was like you could make it sound quite tight, for use of a better term, with the sort of high end control cranked up.
Yeah. And the mid boost button just filled that crossover point in.
Right.
So just
fascinating.
Straight across, and some people like that. Some people want that mid boost on a foot switch. The Aldridge asked if he could have that on a foot switch.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, because I remember his demos of that amp, and I kind of, when I think of what that amp sounds like, I kind of think about like his tone has that sort of like, I don't know, it's like sticky. That's the way I would describe it. It's like it got clarity, but it's also got this really lovely kind of creamy saturation about it.
Yeah, it's that kind of harmonic-y grunge.
Yes,
it's very difficult to use buzzwords to describe sound, but everyone knows in the head what we're after. I mean, I always my heroes were all the 70s guys. I'm like say for example, Santiago would tell you his heroes are like like Malmsteen and. But Malmsteen's heroes are my heroes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Blackmore and Rock and.
So you're Santiago's hero.
Yeah,
Jimmy Page. I mean, Led Zeppelin, my favorite band ever. I mean, the first band I ever saw in 1972.
Oh,
it just blew my mind. And
peak, absolute peak. I've been going through. I always go through these phases and cycles with Zeppelin where I don't listen to them for a while, and then I go back and re-listen to it, and reappreciate all of it, kind of thing. But yeah, I've been on a bit of a kick recently with so much of that, and just the, like the kind of. I think most people, if you don't play guitar, you're just like, yeah, they're that loud, screechy band with the guy in the dragon suit. But they did so much, and there's so much texture, and the production's really interesting.
It was so transcendental. Every song was different from the next, and every album was different from the. For me, that just can't be surpassed. Just like the Jeff Beck and the guitarists.
Yep.
Yeah. I was one of my students. We were talking about Jeff Beck the other day, and just he'd only listened to Jeff's kind of newer stuff. I think like post Guitar Shop, and I was like, oh, like have you listened to Blow by Blow and Wired? He was like, no, I haven't. It's like, man, that's like, if you want to learn that, you kind of got to just start there and try to cop some of that, and then you see the evolution of how expressive he was. And I mean,
he was
still one of the just greatest performances I've seen was him, and he was playing a Strat straight into a DSL. There was like nothing else. It was a backline amp, and it was like as you said, on that level of like, yeah, this is just that little bit extra something special.
He wasn't that bothered about the amp he played into, really. I mean, as long as it did what he wanted to do. I had the good fortune to spend 2 days in rehearsal with with Marshall. Like there was me and Paul Marshall went down. We're going to talk about a signature amp with him, but to be honest, Jeff wasn't that bothered about it. I mean, when we said, what do you want? He goes, well, I just want a loud clean amp. And I'll do the rest. He was a pedal guy,
Right.
Yeah, right.
And he was rehearsing. It was he had Narada Michael Walden on drums, the Rhonda Smith on bass.
Okay, yeah, I
took over from Tal.
Yeah. So I got to see Jeff twice. Once was with Tal Wilkenfield on bass and Vinny Colaiuta, and that was like this. Supreme, everybody just playing like you'd see someone in a jazz club. And I saw him at a Blues and Roots festival with Rhonda on bass and Michael Walden on drums, and it was a completely different show. It was like it was wild, the way she played and the way he was playing drums, and it just had that like I loved seeing the first one, but yeah, there was like something special about that band, and I don't know, he just kind of did his thing and let the other players play. Sometimes you see these kind of legends and it's all about them and not so much the band. He just kind of hung back and let them go nuts.
I think he just liked to play with people who were inspirational players.
Yeah.
People who inspired him and it brought out the best of him. And he was quite innocent in music. I mean, to be honest, I spent a good few hours talking to Jeff, which was bizarre for me. If you can imagine, here's me trying not to be a fanboy, and I talked to him about gear, and he was using the 40th anniversary. That's where he was actually using one of those.
That's a nice tie, isn't it?
But his sound guys didn't like the fact he was using that because they couldn't have as much control as what they wanted. Right. And I remember it was quite sad, really, because he was telling me, he says that, oftentimes on stage, he says, I'll turn the volume right down to a whisper. He says, the monitor guys turned up in the monitor, counteracting what I'm doing, you know what I mean? But the monitor guy's just doing what he would
trying to do, yeah.
Yeah, what he's trying to do. So it's like, and so Jeff's a very organic, sort of dynamic player, and I wouldn't like to try and do the sound for Jeff and anticipate where he's thinking at any time, But just a daft story. I made a tone bender. Can you remember the tone benders? Color sound tone benders.
Yep.
You remember that? It was a false pedal, really, but I used to have one of those when I was a teenager, and I loved it, and I sold it to buy a Big Muff. Because the Big Muff, the blurb in the marketing said, violin like sustain.
I love that.
And to me, I thought, that's the sound of Richie Blackmore, Machine Head.
Oh, right.
And that's the sound that I wanted. So I sold this tone bender and bought the Big Muff. And it sounded nothing like it. It sounded like Collis and Turner on a neck pickup. so I always regretted that. So many years later, I thought, I'm going to make myself a tone bender. So I made myself a tone bender, and it turned out really, really well. And I took it along to this Jeff Beck rehearsal because I just wanted to get his opinion, because I know he used to use them back in the day. And I said, Jeff, can I just ask you your opinion on this? So he said, yeah, plug it in. So I plugged it in, and he said, wow. He says, listen to what I'm doing to that amp, man. That's what. Can I use it on my world tour? And I thought, oh God, I've only got one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, no Jeff Beck.
Yeah, well, and I said,
I'll help you, mate.
I said I wouldn't for anybody else. I says, but I can't say no to you. And I says, he said, well, can you make me some? I says, well, yeah, I'll give it a try. And anyway, I couldn't find the transistors that gave the right sound.
Yeah.
Because he wanted 4. He says there's no point having 1. He says I need 4 because you've seen the Brucey waves, and I couldn't. It was obsolete components, so I said, I can't make them. I said, "We're going to have that one back, please."
Yeah.
So I got it back. I was broken-hearted because I thought,
That's amazing, though. The fact that you got it back, that it just wasn't like, I forgot about that guy, so whatever. But that's, oh man, that's so funny. Especially the tie-in there, the thing that I had, and we've all been through that with gear, and then you're sort of like at the point where you're like, I should either rebuy that or I should just do it myself. So that's but
you couldn't obviously you couldn't rebuy the tone bender. There were discontinued years previous.
Well,
I wouldn't care, paid £14 for that.
Yeah, but they're super collectible now. I think there's a lot of YouTube videos and comparisons, and I think didn't JHS do a big video about tone benders, maybe like one of the massive video essays,
yeah.
and
it's kind of Steve, I'm sure for you, you'd like this band, but you know the band Rival Sons? I imagine they're...
Yes.
Yeah,
I've seen them.
Yeah, so they're kind of like... They're like... and I say this as sort of like... In terms of doing the Zeppelin thing, I feel like they really do it right. Like, they got the right energy from it, where it's like they have a lot of songs that sound different. It's not just like, oh, well, there's someone screeching and there's loud guitar solos and boom, boom drums. But there was, I did a show recently, and there was this young band who opened, and they, you know, were very, very Zeppelin inspired. But they had two guitar players, and one of them was playing a Firebird, and he just kind of had that sound. And I said, oh, dude, like what fuzz are you using? Because I was like, that's the Rival Sun sound. And he was like, oh my God, I love that band so much. It's a tone bender. Like, and he had like 2 or 3 different tone bender style clones on his board. And he was like, oh, you know, this one does this era. And it's a whole rabbit hole. I guess because they're so simple that the fewer components you have, the more impact those components have, right?
It's very simple circuit. So there's only 3 transistors. But it's the transistors are critical and to the sound you get. Then the original ones are germanium transistors, which are a different characteristic. But each germanium type has a sound in itself, and it's a nightmare really, because you know it's not repeatable. You have to if you get a bunch of germanium transistors, you've got to select. You know, yeah. So that's why they would be very expensive if they actually made, you know, really good ones, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why I got rid of my original one. I said, let's shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a different time, though. I mean, yeah, there's so many stories of like that. I think up until the internet, when, you know, all the knowledge was there, and things become way more collectible and stuff, you just no one would have known. It's like the stories of the, there's so many of them, because like, you know, I'm in my recording studio at the moment. I'm a recording engineer, and people talk about, oh, well, in the mid 70s when like Neumann U87s and stuff came along, all of a sudden the U47s just went in the skip bin, or I guess, you know, it's not called skip bin everywhere else, but you know, it's just, they're literally thrown away.
In the skip, yeah.
It is a skip, yeah. They're just thrown away, and people didn't know that. Fast forward 40 years, that's like $20,000 to get another one. It's just the amount of money that gets flushed down the drain. But even there was a TV station here about 20 years ago where they had one of the EMT plate, the 140 big plates.
Oh yeah.
And they called up this is what I was studying, called up my old lecturer and said, oh, we got to get rid of this thing. It's just taking up space. It's either going to go to you right now or it's getting thrown in the trash. And he said, well, I can't pick it up. And said, well, I guess it's going in the trash then. And sure enough, there it goes.
Oh, never.
And, but that's life. And you just wouldn't, either you don't know or you don't care. So
mate, they should have called Bill. He would have gone and got it from the bin.
A different time.
It's so sad to think of how much really excellent gear has just gone by the wayside because people don't know what it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, wasn't there, I read a story, and I feel like I've mentioned this, I might have mentioned it to Santiago, where when like the Vox amps the Beatles were using, because they were just having to run them at full blast, they kept returning, like, you know, anytime they'd come back through, they're like, oh, we've got a bunch of amps which aren't functioning, so we're out of backups. We'll just take them to the factory and you give us a bunch of new ones. And that basically the old ones kind of never got repaired. And when that building either got sold or they left the premises, it just all got tossed into landfill. So they were like, you know, it's like somewhere there is a parking lot or a building, and buried underneath that are just the remnants of all these, you know, classic amps.
I think they should find the person who made that decision and bring it to book.
Yeah.
Even now.
Yep.
I have a 1961 AC30.
Oh.
It's a fawn one. It's not a black one. It's a fawn one.
Wow, really?
The original one's the Beatles had. I'm frightened to take it out of the house.
Yeah. That's, man, that'd be in that category now of just, you know, at the time, oh, yeah, it's a thing that we use. It's loud enough, but there was that arms race in the 60s and 70s for volume. And, you know, that's all kind of been superseded by, like, PAs are so good now that, now you kind of let the PA do the work and you play within those parameters. But yeah, that's what's special about that app? Have you opened it up?
I played it when I was in the Animals. In fact, we used to do double tours with the Yardbirds, and they used to ask if they could use that amp as well.
Really? Because I reckon I haven't played that many AC30s, but two stick out to me. I have a friend who's a recording engineer in Troy and I are in Perth, so the other side of Australia in Sydney, and he recorded some very, very big albums by Australian bands here, and he's got, I think might have been like a 63 or a 64 AC30, and I got to go to his house and play it, and it was just like the sound. As soon as he mentioned the band he had used it with, it's like, oh yeah, that's the sound of that entire record, which you hear so much on the radio now. And it was just, yeah, that was sort of like, the newer ones definitely don't sound like this. And then I remember trying out maybe 3 of them in a room, like a reissue. It was like a reissue, then a reissue that had greenbacks put in it, and then a 70s AC30 with Fanes. And it was so heavy, but the Fanes had this like really, it didn't really sound like a classic Vox sound, but it was unique, and that's kind of stuck with me.
A very distinctive sound. My favorite way to use mine's a non-top boost.
Okay.
One. And my favorite way to use the AC30 is just to plug into the normal channel with a treble booster.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of essential, isn't it?
And there's no tone controls in the Vox apart from the top cut, but you don't need. If you just put a treble booster into the normal channel, crank it up.
That's also my favorite way to use them too.
Brian May,
yeah,
Richie Blackmore, Tony Iommi, all that was what happened in the early days,
Yeah,
and it's a beautiful sound. It's just lovely. And one of my philosophies when I was designing the amps is to get that kind of effect. If I want to, because I think that is vintage tone is very much based on that kind of system.
Yeah, it's sort of like I mean I always remember people saying, "Oh, it's very pure," but it's weird talking about purity when you're talking about things that are heavily distorted. But it's like if you're when someone's doing engineering or maths or something, they talk about working up from first principles. There's like
yes.
It gets you closer to those first principles, whereas, as much as I love multi-channel amps and boogies with various switches and, there's something very, very to the point about you got an amp that doesn't, again, your palette is maybe a bit more limited, so you have to work more on the expressive qualities in your hands, and you actually play a bit more.
Absolutely. Your fingers are called upon to do more work. I mean, it's vintage tone. When I was kind of listening as a teenager to guitarists, so I loved that they all had their own sound. They all sounded unique. They didn't all, you could just buy one note, 1-2 notes. I mean, you could just tell who it was straight away, and that was, that's because there was a quality in the sound that allowed that. It's not true of everybody these days, but to me, when I listen to a lot of people, it's kind of homogenized. Mm-hmm. And I think
like it's one of the downsides of so much information being available is that you kind of don't have to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah,
and
but I think,
sorry, mate, you go.
I was just going to say, it wasn't a question of just the gain, because people had a lot of gain back then. It was about the tone, So that's all I wanted to say. Please carry on.
I was going to say, obviously, like with that appreciation for those kind of things, with something like the vintage modern, and how long did that take to develop, for example, to kind of get it from concept to something that's working? And then what was the kind of final, because it's one thing to just design an amp that does that, but with a company like Marshall, you've got to build things to scale, right? And you've got compliance, and you've got, it's got to be manufactured to a certain spec and all those kind of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of stages to go through. I mean, it took probably a year to 18 months, and there was 3 prototypes. Had to go through the safety test houses, and the safety test houses, I think Santiago touched on this as well.
Yes.
I mean, basically, they'll drop a spanner on the circuit when it's live, and if it catches fire, you fail. It has to fail safe. It has, so it has to be kind of bomb-proof,
And if the machine that goes ping for whatever reason, then you fail, No one else goes ping.
We get these amps back from the test houses, and they've been on fire and everything. You know what I mean? There's black marks all over the place where they've tried to make it go on fire.
California Jam signature Marshall.
My poor what you've been doing to it. And then it's there's the drop test where they drop the amp from 6 foot, and it hasn't got there's got to be a limited amount of damage.
Right.
Yep.
Don't let me watch that.
I was saying to Troy on last week's episode that when I was in high school, I had a Marshall TSL. I still have the amp, but it was on a raised stage and then on a quad box, and someone walked behind the stage while the amp was on. I'd finished playing, but left my amp on. It was probably on standby. Someone walked behind the stage, something happened, and apparently the head just fell straight back while it was on. So someone came in and was like, "Oh, your amp's fallen off stage." So I ran around, panicked. And all that had happened was like the speaker jack had broken. But then I plugged the amp in and it still worked. And I don't know if I don't love the sound of that amp. So I don't know if something got just enough damaged, but I mean, it's a testament to that kind of process where, that can happen and it just still goes. Whereas, obviously a vintage amp might not do that, or an amp that your mate who knows a bit about how to wire stuff and he can do some sweet mods might not do.
This is, I mean, a lot of boutique manufacturers, they'll use top quality components because they're only building a handful.
Yep.
If you times that by 10,000, that's a lot of extra money.
Yeah.
So that but what they don't do, a lot of them, is that they don't go through stringent tests.
Yes.
That big companies have to, because they're putting their faith in it, in confidence in the product, and I mean, these guys are experienced, so they know what they're doing, But still, we would have to have that piece of paper that said this has been through a safety test house and it's ready for sale to the public, which gives peace of mind to both sides, really.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot that goes on. It's not just like build a circuit and put it in. That sounds pretty good, yeah. Then,
and go and hang out with rock stars for the rest of the time while you're on the clock,
Yeah, I mean, there's that side of it. As we often used to get like people coming in, and every time they were on tour in England, they'd come and visit. Zach Wilde would always come in, and because him and Jim were very, very close.
Yeah, right.
He used to call Jim Dad. So Zach would hang about, and it was really funny. I mean, we'd have someone like My Chemical Romance, remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And then Jim used to take them for a Chinese meal, in Bletchley, and you'd have we'd all be sitting there having this Chinese meal in Bletchley, and people go, "Excuse me, is that My Chemical Romance?" No. It's so obvious. It so obviously was. I remember walking around IKEA with Yngwie Malmsteen across the road from Arsenal, and I said, "Well, you wouldn't expect to see Yngwie Malmsteen in IKEA." Well, actually, you probably would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, it's he has to go there. It's part of the citizenship.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. Like, if anyone who lived in Bletchley said, I could have sworn I saw whoever,
What was Yngwie Malmsteen buying at IKEA?
Some kind of Swedish products, crisps. Or I tell you, there was some food product that he wanted. He could only get there.
Oh my god! Oh yeah, because that's right. They have the specific Swedish. I know what you mean. They have those candies. What are they called, Leon? You know those things. Begins with a D.
Dime.
Yeah. They have,
and they do the dime cake there, which is really nice. So that's funny. Like, in terms of that, speaking of the the celebrity element of it, Did you, we know, speaking of Santiago, he did Ingve's amp and Slash's amp. Was there anything, were you involved in any of that kind of process, or were there any amps which maybe you can talk about that, say, never actually made it to production? Or I imagine there was a lot of people who people would have said, oh, you should do a signature amp for this guy or this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually working on a signature amp for Gary Moore.
Really?
Okay.
Wow.
You have to tell us more about that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite players, obviously, and someone, still got the blues, is that'd be up there in terms of when you say, what are the most iconic Marshall sounds? That'd be in the top 5, probably. I'm trying to think.
Gary was
that's amazing.
Very influential player. And I had getting as far as like the second prototype and only had to do the reverb.
Right.
And he had a lot of personal problems at the time, a lot of which I won't go into, but it was affecting things, the progress of things, and he sadly died.
Yeah,
he died right before the project was completed, and obviously Marshall couldn't release that out because it couldn't be signed off by him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
as a signature, and couldn't release it because it would look as though Marshall was cashing in on that. So it was kind of it's all up there.
Yeah.
What was the
if anyone deserved a signature amp, it was, for me growing up, that was one of the reasons I was super into Marshalls. Was I loved the way he sounded, and it was so synonymous with Gary.
Well, I mean, a lot of the signature amps were driven by Korg.
Right.
Right.
Nick Bocott.
Okay, yeah.
Nick was really into heavy metal. He was heavy metal mad, and a lot of his friends from when he was in Green River, like Zach, Kerry King, and all that, and he kind of drove that signature amp for them, And I was getting to the point where Marshall, you couldn't oversubscribe with signature amps, so they had to slow everything that was getting released was a signature amp, just about. And ironically, which I wasn't very happy with, the fact that no English guitarists.
Right. Yeah. Never even thought.
Where was Richie Blackmore? Richie Blackmore should have been the first one to have a signature Marshall, in my opinion.
Yeah, he had a signature Engel, didn't he? At that point.
Funnily enough, straight after Slash got the first signature Marshall.
Right.
Really? Because I mean, like, that's the sound. Most people in America would be aware of Marshall because of the Hendrix Association, but you can argue that Hendrix's thing, the rest of his band were British musicians. He moved to London. There's a connection with Chaz Chandler and the Animals that, yes, he was American, but he was very influential in that British Marshall sound. And the Gary thing is kind of tragic again because he passed away during it. Blackmore, Robin Trower would be another one that comes to mind when I think of. Didn't he play the Vintage Moderns?
Yeah, still does.
There you go. A friend of mine saw him not too long ago and kind of, he was one of those guys who's like, look, he's always sounded great, but it's one of those guitar players that you have to experience it live because he just has this sound.
He's a tone master. He's the epitome of that sort of like vintage. It takes a lot from Hendrix, and he's got that kind of bluesy. His feel comes out through the guitar. Is a really kind of underestimated, understated guitar player. And that's if you really listen to him properly, then you get into him more.
We used to play a couple of his songs. Hey, Leon.
Yeah, what do we do? I think, what was that? The old Gazman band? I think we did Day of the Eagle and what's the other one? Not Little Bit of Sympathy. Two Rolling Stone.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Guys, that was an album for me. I think that's the album, that and there's a few Purple albums from, it's like that, Rainbow Rising and, Burn. They're my Strat albums. If I want to like play a Strat and get into it, then they're the ones that I associate those Blackmore and Trower even more than I would Hendrix. You know, they're bigger influences for me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, it was Jimi Hendrix that started it for me when he died. Funnily enough, I just seen him on TV with his white Strat, and I just thought, like, it just looked so great, you know. But the guitarists that influenced me were like Blackmore. I mean, for all Zeppelin is my favorite band, Jimmy Page is not my favorite guitar player.
Yeah, right. I can understand that.
Yeah, but Blackmore, just his sound, his style is very innovative. He doesn't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things he brought to the table that other people get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And also Michael Schenker.
You're speaking my language here, Steve. This is stuff
I grew up with
anyway. So, as well. So, and which is probably directly because this is stuff my dad grew up on as well. You know.
Yeah.
So,
I remember seeing Michael Schenker when he was 17 or 18 at Newcastle Mayfair, and he's just stood stock still all night with his long blonde hair, but he played like it. That's just amazing to see.
Because isn't there the connection with before he was in UFO? Wasn't Bernie Marsden? Did he play with them or?
He did, but he didn't have a very happy tenure with them.
Yeah, right. I can understand that.
No, Bernie's time with UFO wasn't very happy, and I think it was him who suggested Michael Schenker.
Wow.
Okay.
He's got a book out that says as much.
All right.
I'm a good friend of Bernie's. Bernie used to live near the Marshall factory. He used to pop in often.
That's
really nice guy.
Did he have a signature Marshall or a special edition?
Isn't there one now? I thought there was one. Is it a white one, or am I imagining that?
It's a white one. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's just like a plexi. There's nothing different about it. It was just a kind of a tribute to the White Snake that he had. Yeah. That was done after I was there. But Bernie actually wants the amp I've got in my office that I've designed that never seems to come out. Bernie won.
So
Bernie wants that.
The Gary Moore one or a different amp?
No, the one I've
designed.
The one I've designed.
Actually,
he wants that.
I want to talk about that too, but could just quickly, if you can talk about it, the Gary Moore amp. What was that? Was that based on anything, or was it a from scratch sort of thing? Are you able to talk about that at all?
It was based on a plexi.
Right.
It
makes sense, really.
At the end of it's before he died, he was playing just the reissue 1959, the hand-wired underwater plexi. So he wanted that. Anybody wanted an extra gain stage in, and he wanted the option to be able to cut the power to half because he was getting a lot of complaints apparently from the people with the meters who were threatening to close his concerts down.
He wanted in Europe, right? Because I've toured through Europe, and that was like strictly enforced, where curfews and sound level, like for all. It was strange because I remember being like, this is weird, but then they had a lot of like really supportive venues and things like that. So there were a lot of rules, but at least the venues were open, that they didn't just shut them when a new apartment complex went up or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Gary used to play loud. He used to, ironically, I mean, I was standing in one of his sound checks, and he had that thing turned right up, which didn't bother me because I pretty much the same. But he had them, them yellow foam ear plugs. Yep. And I says, "Are you joking?" I says, "You're going to kill the first 15 rows." I says, "But you've got to." Some of them. He says, "Well, you got to feel it."
No, I agree with that. No, in all seriousness, though, I think the foam earplugs are really great for just listening to guitar because that real like ear piercing top end disappears. Obviously, you drop the overall volume, but it smooths out that little area. I actually find it really pleasing to listen to, and as he says, like you can feel like the physical experience of playing through an amp, you still get that,
and it takes all the heat out of the cymbals as well.
I used to when I used to mix front of house. there were gigs, like especially loud gigs, where same deal. I just put the foam earplugs in, and it knocks off just the nasty bits. You can still get a good balance of everything else that you're hearing. I think it's not a secret or a trick, but I think it's like, valuable.
It just rolls up the top end, which is all the higher harmonics.
Yeah, and all the nasty stuff bouncing around the room and all that. So that just disappears. So
I would agree with the headphones thing. It's kind of pleasant, and feeling your pants flap in the thunder of a 4x12 cabinet is, I feel like it's something that as a guitar player, and sort of all the things we've been talking about, these, I'm going to call them foundational players for just basically modern guitar music, because that's what they are. Guys like, whether it's Hendrix or Blackmore, or, they did things which had never been done before and which are kind of taken for granted now. Mm-hmm. I think of that video Pete Thorne did a while ago where it was a plexi, everything dimed, and he had a bunch of different players come in and play.
Yep.
And you could tell the seasoned guys knew how to work the volume control and just where to stand. And then the people who were used to playing with noise gates and distortion pedals, it was more noise than actual music. It was kind of like trying to wrestle a crocodile or something. So it's part of the art and the craft of it. So you did mention that you're designing something. You've got an amp that you've been trying to put out for various reasons. Is that something you can talk about, or something that you forecast you'll have a release date for?
Well, I'm hopefully going to get into action as soon as possible. It's basically it's an amp. It's the sound is quite vintage, but it's got quite a fair bit again. It's not going to be some that's just for the darts. This is going to breathe some fire. You know what I mean? It's going to, the tone is there. And everyone who's played it has been like, "Wow, this is it. This is what this is what I wanted all of my life," which is the sort of feedback that I want.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
right. Yeah, it sounds fine.
Yeah, no, it's and like I said, Bernie Marsden really, really wanted me to let him take it out on the road, and I thought I cannot. It's the only one, you know what I mean? I cannot let it out of my care. So, I had to say no to Bernie. If Jeff Beck had asked, I would have found it very difficult to say no to Jeff. But thankfully, I didn't let him when I wasn't around. But no, I mean, I'm hoping to get the ball rolling sometime this year.
Great.
Again. The problem for me is the marketing, because at the moment it's a 100-watt head, but it might not be that. You have to do market research to find out what's in vogue. It may be that nobody's buying 100-watt heads anymore, or everybody wants 30-watt combos.
Yeah, it's interesting because we spoke to Jason from Head First Amplification over here, who just kind of was curious about electronics and started building amps, and it feels like there's the market. To me, it's actually amazing that desire for 100-watt heads hasn't ever gone away. For me, if I think about, I want a new amp. I mean, for me, there's a mystique with 50-watt amps. I feel like because they're a bit underrated, and then reading that Michael Schenker always played a 50-watt head, and Yngwie played a 50-watt head, and but like Troy's got an old JMP badged 1959 that Jason's doing some mods to at the moment. But it's a pretty, when those amps are good, there's nothing like it, is there?
Well, it's what I grew up with, and for me, it's the foundation, like you said, of tone, of guitar tone, and it makes you play in a certain way. I mean, look, you get a lot of guys when they're coming in. If you used to reissue something like that at Marshall, you used to get a lot of guys coming. I'll just plug this tube screamer in. Makes it easier. Easier. Look, it does make it easier, and you do. But a lot of people used to set it so the tone of the amp had nothing to do with it anymore. You know what I mean? And I thought, well, there's got to be some kind of you have to work for it. And if you work for it, you'll generally get a better reward.
Yeah.
It's almost like the British versus American thing. If you were going to be super stereotypical, it's like the British side of it is like, no, you got to do the hard yards and you just got to stiff upper lip your way through it. And the American thing is like, no, just glitz and glamour, bro. Have more gain and go nuts. So circling back around from your thing, from my extensive research as well, that complete other end, were you involved in designing the Class 5 at Marshall as well?
Yes, that was me. That was mine.
Yeah, you're right. So what was was that because of, I guess, what was happening at the time with, low wattage studio amps kind of becoming in vogue?
Yeah. The 5-watt format was quite popular at the time. There's quite a few companies doing the 5-watt valve amps. So it would be silly for Marshall not to get in on that. And Marshall had done that before with the old Mercuries and things like that, so it's not like we were new to it, but it was the right time. And it just had to be 5 watts worth of Marshallness, where you could actually crank it. Like you didn't have to keep it down. You could actually crank it.
Did that present itself with any new challenges compared to doing the higher wattage stuff where, you're doing something like the vintage modern, it's going to have that top gear when everything's wide open, it's going to scream. And that's like, you'd have to sort of optimize for the lower volume stuff. What was the challenge with the Class 5 compared to a big head?
The biggest challenge with the Class 5 really was getting it so it came competitively in a budget with other stuff that was in the market.
Right.
Because a lot of stuff was made in the Far East, the Class 5 wasn't.
Yeah, right.
It was made in the UK, so it was very, very difficult to get the price competitive, even though, to be honest, it shouldn't have been competing in terms of price with the Far East ones. It was made in the UK. It was a valve amp. It was a Marshall.
Yeah, it's got Marshall on it. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So I found that that possibly a little bit too far in the competitive stakes there. They should have just let it be where I wanted to be and priced it accordingly.
Right.
But they tried to be a bit more competitive than what they should have been, in my opinion.
What year was that? Was that around 2010, give or take?
Something like that, yeah. Up to 2008, possibly.
2008, okay, right. I do remember that period of, because I think, Epiphone, they had that range of like lower wattage valve amps.
Junior?
That was one of the ones, yes. That was one of the ones that was out at the time.
Yeah, and there were a few other, I remember there was this is not like on the cheaper end, but I think Cornford as well had a cheaper like low wattage amp.
Harlequin, was that it?
Yeah, maybe that was the one.
I remember when Gary Moore was the first artist to plug into the Class 5 and was in prototype form, and I think he said he had a Harlequin.
Oh, okay.
And he said this just
yeah.
None against the Harlequin. I've not even played one, but he said this is just so good.
There was that at that time. I remember really desperately wanting a high gain, like boutique, 5-watt head, something like that, because I was mostly playing in my bedroom. I was playing a bunch of rack gear as well, but I was that was a different story. That was more fun and games. But I really wanted just something that would be appropriate, I guess, for bedroom stuff. And now that you mentioned that sort of that period of time, because I kind of forgot about that. It's so funny.
It's funny because I kind of want to try and find one now, because I remember really like being so close to buying one a bunch of different times, like going and playing them in shops and really enjoying what they were doing. And then, so 2008, I think I started gigging regularly around 2010. And it was sort of in that like, I should probably make sure I've got stuff that's now that I can actually properly have an excuse to play loud. I was always playing loud and, always had 100-watt amps, but 5-watt amp, that sounds fun.
I was going to say though, I think like, going back to 100-watt amps and what's in style, it's just, there seems to be so many options now of, if you're going to use a load box or an, you're going to use whatever the aux, the UA aux, or you're going to use a Freyet power station or whatever. It's almost like it doesn't matter. Like if it's a 5-watt amp or it's a 30-watt amp or whatever, you can still play it any volume and you're going to get a decent approximation of the tone. Because I don't know, like both of you can tell me if I'm crazy or not, but like that 100-watt head sound or a 50-watt sound, it's just like, I don't know if it's the tubes or it's the transformer or if it's everything just getting so like hot physically, being around it or loud and everything buzzing. But I don't know, there's just like there's no quiet way of doing that. There's no like smaller way. So yeah.
Interestingly, and I know you did a video with Santiago about the Class A, B, and Class A, and Class thing and all that. Most people who are bedroom players who play 100-watt Marshalls only hear it in Class A.
Yeah, interesting.
They don't actually get it loud enough to get it to go into that B.
Okay.
If they play it in the house. So most people who are bedroom players are familiar with the sound of Marshalls in Class A.
That's funny.
Which the Class 5 is Class A.
Right.
Oh, there you go.
It's Class A right up to its full 5 watts.
So does it just use a single power tube?
Yeah.
Okay,
It uses a single EL84. You can plug it into a 412 and drag a 412, and then it becomes apparent then that a 5-watt amp is half as loud as a 50.
Right. Okay.
In terms of volume.
Yeah.
It's loud.
I mean, yeah, I used to have an orange Tiny Terror, which I used to gig with quite a lot, but it was 15 or 7.5 watts, I think, or 7 watts. I don't remember. But that thing at 7.5 versus 15 was like not that noticeable. Like, it wasn't all of a sudden, it's, as we all know, that's not how it works. It's not twice as loud. Well, it's, you're not going to get like all this extra volume out of it.
Well, louder in it.
Yeah, but even the 7.5, it's like I could just about do a pub gig with that, with at least for stage sound, maybe a little bit of help from front of house. It was fine. So yeah, I don't know.
When I was playing with the Animals, I used to use one of them, the Fender Pro Junior.
Oh yeah.
Pro Junior, yep.
The Pro Junior. It was just a volume and a tone.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, the sound guy is going to love us. Sound, because they always say, can you use something? So I said, I'm going to take one of these along.
Yep.
And I was so sick of hearing my solos getting turned up halfway through.
Oh, that is. I understand the pain.
Yep.
And I'd look across, and the sound guy would be like talking to some girl, and
Yep.
And I'd be like, and there's nothing worse than hearing your solo getting turned up halfway through.
Yep.
I'd rather just not be turned up,
So I've never had the luxury ever of the 1,000 gigs that I've done. I'm almost always bringing the PA and doing all of the sound. So it's just, I wish I could have that experience a little bit more often.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? If you use when you're in control of the volume, if your solo boosts up, you can't be heard. There's nothing worse than just being, working so hard, and people say, well, it looked great, but you couldn't hear it.
See, I always tell people, I tell singers, because I'm really bad at learning lyrics for songs, and I always tell people, look, if you just don't, if you don't know the words, just look really like you're into the song so hard, and just pull away from the microphone, so it becomes the sound guy's problem. Oh, it looked great. Oh, thanks so much. That's all I ask. It doesn't really matter what it sounds like.
I turned you down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Same deal, really. Same deal.
Yep.
By the way, I actually played in your neck of the woods.
Did you?
Really?
Yes. That was in 1996.
Right
so you're in Perth.
We're in Perth, yeah.
Right? Yep. Are you in Perth as well,
yes.
Troy?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. The very first place I visited in Australia
Awesome.
was Perth, and it was February '96, and God, it was hot.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, February's the hottest month here, so
it's very bad.
Stepping off that plane, and it was like stepping into an oven.
Yeah, I bet.
And I just remember walking down the high street, and there was all of these shops with loads of tower fans.
Yeah.
I had to just go in and stand in front of them.
I feel like we didn't all get air conditioning until like 2000, maybe 99. Maybe that was the transition, but it was hot, man. So who were you playing with at the time?
The Animals.
That was with the Animals, right?
Playing with the Animals. We didn't actually play in Perth. We stayed in Perth when we arrived, and we played in Albany.
Oh, right.
Interesting.
Mandurah.
A little cooler.
And Mandurah as well.
Mandurah.
Wow.
Yeah. And Kalgoorlie.
Did you? Oh, we love Kalgoorlie here.
Kalgoorlie. That you are an official friend of the podcast now, Stephen, because often people who haven't gigged in Perth, and Troy's done that gig 1,000 times. I've done it 990 times. You know, it's like going back in time, isn't it? It's the Australia you see in the movies.
Particularly 96.
It's very colonial sort of vibe, and interesting street of young ladies.
Yeah, well, my granddad, when I was growing up, he had this expression was something would, that'll never happen. Otherwise, I'll walk down Hay Street with my pants down. And I never knew what he was talking about, because we have the main street in Perth, the Perth city is called Hay Street. And then I went to Kalgoorlie and found out that Hay Street was where all of the prostitutes were.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
didn't tell me that till I was an adult. But yeah.
For anyone listening, Kalgoorlie is one of the few places, if maybe the only place in Australia, where prostitutes can solicit their wares on the street. And it's still there. And a lot of the pubs still have the skimpy barmaids, so girls serving you in their bikini, and then a lot of them, they'll be 15 minutes out of the hour, they don't wear their tops either. So you can imagine when you're 23 years old and you go and play those gigs and you're staying at the hotel, the thrill of it all, basically.
We had a lot of fun there, in not in weird, creepy ways, but we just had a lot of fun in those places. In our 20s, but that was not in 96. I said that would have been a very different time again.
96 would have been proper wild.
It was kind of like the Amsterdam of Australia.
Actually, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's a very, very good way of putting it.
How were the gigs? Did you enjoy the gigs? Yeah,
excellent. It was us and the Yardbirds.
Yep.
We did a double headline where we'd alternate who was headlining every, and we started in the Perth side and did those gigs. Then we went across up to Darwin.
Oh, great!
And came all the way down that coast.
Wow!
Cairns, great place in Cairns called Jono's Blues Bar.
Okay,
isn't
that the most Australian name for a pub as well, or venue?
Yeah. Jono's Blues Bar, and they had a house band, and Jono was in the house band. It was one of the best gigs I've ever played in my life. It was fantastic. The vibe was absolutely brilliant. I'll never forget that gig.
That's great.
Came down, Mackay, Brisbane, Townsville, Sydney, the 10th anniversary Sydney Bikers Festival, we played there. Okay. And I've got all the dates written down somewhere, but we were there for a good 2 or 3 weeks. It was great. It was fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome.
Absolutely loved it. Wonderful time. Great. Came back in 1997 as well, but only to the
East Coast.
The East Coast, yeah.
Not the West Coast, Best Coast.
No, the promoter we used at that time was based over on the East Coast, and only had would play there.
Well, the fact you came here at all in that time in the 90s is quite surprising, because we didn't get anything over here touring wise, because we had a lot of artists that would come from America, so it's easier to get to the East Coast, but then it's one capital city over on our side of the country. So, you're not really coming for the same sort of audience. It's really tough. So, yeah, it's admirable that you made it.
I loved it. It was a great time there,
And I know we've been speaking about amps a lot, understandably, but like what's been the constants through your rigs have you always kind of played the same guitar? I noticed you've got a big headstock Strat for pure Blackmore rock worship.
I've got a couple actually. I've got 2 70s Strats, and I bought them from you.
All right.
I've owned them since they were 76.
That's the same as yours, hey, Leon?
I know.
Here we go.
There you go, mate. Look, there you go. So while Steve's getting his, this is a 1977 Fender Strat. It's been refretted with stainless wire by Tim and MT Guitars. And Troy, you actually did a pretty great job at cleaning this one up while ago. Look at that.
Well, hang on. Let me just
Let's straight up.
No, this had a black scratch plate on when I first bought it.
Right. Okay.
In '76, and it was exactly the same, exactly like that. The black plastic.
Here we go. Big headstock club.
I didn't like that. I wanted the white.
I don't want to be left out. Sorry, I've got this is a Japanese Strat, 70s style. So I just have to be involved.
Yes, this is the way. There's the thumbnail taken care of for this video straight away. So there you go. They're definitely cousins. Now, is that aside from the scratch plate? Have you changed anything with the electronics or anything like that?
Yeah. I've customized the electronics to where I want. These are Kinman pickups.
Okay.
From Australia.
From Australia. Yeah.
How do you like them? Because
my favorite pickups, noiseless pickups. When I was playing with the animals, we used to do a lot of TV show, and having that buzz, the 50-second buzz, 60-second buzz, was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So these were a godsend, and I went through a few different brands, and these were the ones I arrived at, which sound to me still like a Strat, mm-hmm. and the noise cancelling is fantastic. These are the Woodstocks, Kinman Woodstocks.
Okay, they're the ones I feel like if you're going to get some Kinmans, people are like, yeah, start with these, and then Chris Kinman's kind of one of those. From everything I've heard, he's one of those just, he does his thing, and some of the ideas he has and some of the things he comes up with are just like, man, how did you think of that? And then it works. It seems so out of the box, and then it works so well.
I think he was the first one to do noiseless pickups.
Okay.
Oh, right.
I believe he was the first. But I recommend these highly. They're fantastic.
I have to try them out. I need to put some new pickups in my. I've got another 80s Jap Strat over there, which it's just a bit janky sounding at the moment. It's just been set up and it plays great, but it is not quite sounding right. So I might just go through, change the pickups out. So I'll look into those ones.
So also,
a bit of Yngwie.
No.
Or Richie Blackmore. Did Richie do it first?
Have you done the semi-scallop, the Blackmore style ones? Oh, he's lost the.
Oh no,
he's lost the plug.
Leon, yeah, just describe for those listening in audio.
Sorry,
it's okay.
I pulled my headphones out in the excitement.
Yeah, right. So I'll explain very quickly, and to anyone who's watching the visual podcast, this is my Yngwie Strat, which has. Oh, I need to put it this way, not towards the actual monitor. You can probably see if it will focus. Mm-hmm. Come on, focus. You got this. Let's get it focused on the headstock.
You can see it. You can see a bit of the scalloping there, Leon.
Anyway,
yeah,
it's very deep and it's all the way. But the Blackmore style ones, he just kind of takes the high strings.
No, he does the whole neck, but it's more like a tick. If you look, it's more like a tick than a semicircle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
It's more like a tick.
Yeah.
So now, did you do that yourself?
Yeah. In 1980.
Wow. Was there, can you remember, was it just a kind of like, all right, I'm going to do this? Or was it like, if I mess this up, I'm going to ruin my favorite guitar?
Because I was such a Blackmore fan and Yngwie wasn't even around then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I was such a Blackmore fan. You couldn't buy Scallop Strat. So I just thought, madness. Remember, it wasn't a vintage guitar at the time.
Well, yeah. So what's the purpose of the tick shape versus the normal, like, semicircle? Like, why?
Because that's where your finger is where the tick is at the deepest.
Oh, okay, I understand. Is that?
And I just looked at photographs of Richie's guitar, and I just thought, well, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. In terms of like keeping it in tune, is it a little bit more difficult? Because I'd imagine like that deep, that depth would be tough, right?
When you're playing chords, certainly. But you just learn to just have a very, very light touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you more articulate, really, because you don't expend any energy on.
Yep.
Especially on old Strats. Like before I had this one refretted, it was we were talking about like the effort you have to expend earlier. There was a lot of effort going on, it was small frets and small radius. It's you got to earn those notes out of there. You mentioned very briefly as well, and I just want to ask about this because he's one of my favorite players, and I feel like so underappreciated outside of Europe and the UK is Uli Roth. Was he, someone you kind of just mentioned him before we started? So is he someone you've worked with before, or is he? Yeah, right. Because does he live in the UK?
Yes, he lives in near Wales, Oswestry near Wales.
Right.
Uli was talking to me about his signature, and this was after I was at Marshall, about the signature amp. But to be honest, his ideas were so bizarre and out there in terms of what he wanted. I just said, this thing's not going to be liftable, never mind sellable. So it's kind of all, But I mean, Uli's a great player. He's a great player. And one of the albums I would add to those albums that you mentioned before for Strat is Virgin Killer by the Scorpions. Some amazing Strat work on there.
Man, just his what was the other? Obviously, the song that I remember hearing and being like, oh, where it clicked, where it's like, there's the other. Reading interviews with Yngwie, who's one of my favorite players, is always like Richie Blackmore, and then a bunch of composers. But hearing Uli, it's like, and especially Sales of Sharon, is like, there it is. That's where you go from the thing Richie was doing, where it's just he's pulling from some, Blackmore was pulling all these other influences from elsewhere, but it's like, for me, Uli Roth had the finesse, and like a lot of those. Watching how he's playing so elegant and so relaxed, and he never looks like he's straining too hard. Whereas Richie's, you watch those old Rainbow or Deep Purple clips, is like he'll flick the toggle switch to the neck pickup, adjust the volume control, play nothing, and then flick it back, and then he's very kinetic on there. And you could tell he was digging in, but Uli just had that grace about his playing.
Yeah, Uli is. Uli took a 14-year sabbatical just to compose. He's so dedicated to the music, and probably, his approach to his playing. Richie's probably the sort of how can I make this impressive and make it, and just. My favorite Richie playing is in the studio, not live. Live, he tends to just be a bit kind of cavalier about it, Mm-hmm. But there's a track called Coronariah Sridig.
I don't know.
Have you ever heard of that? It's from the Burn era. It was the B-side of a single.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Coronariah Sridig. It's an instrumental.
Okay, look at that.
While we were waiting to get a singer, and this guitar playing on there is Richie's best.
Yeah. Well, there's my essential listening. I've learned many things today, but I hadn't even heard that B-side, so that's fascinating.
Especially the final verse, his guitar playing. I'll say no more.
And it's. I think as well, growing up in Australia, Deep Purple in particular are. I'll put it this way, and I went to see Deep Purple and Journey with my wife, who's American. And if that gig was happening in America, Journey would be the headliner, and there'd be another band, and then Deep Purple. But Deep Purple headlined here, and I love both bands. But yeah, they're still supremely popular here. And same thing I know in the UK and on the continent. There's something where it's I think because they weren't an American band, they're well known amongst guitar players and stuff like that. But Richie, for that reason, doesn't I still feel like he's a bit underrated in the conversation, where people think of British guitarists and it's Clapton, Page, Iommi. And of course, Richie Blackmore. We forgot about him, but Americans have Van Halen, so that's all they want to talk about.
Didn't Richie kind of do that to himself, because he sort of disappeared a bit?
Yeah, and also as well, Richie never claimed any kind of Clapton, Beck and Page said they took their heritage from the American blues scene and all that, so the Americans probably welcomed them with open arms. Richie never did that. He or very little of that compared to those. So they were probably, well, how come a pigeonhole Richie? I don't know. He's certainly underestimated, and as far as I'm concerned, he should be right up there with Clapton, Beck and Page.
Yeah. I'd agree.
I mean,
he's certainly around at the same time as those guys, you know.
Yeah. I mean, Rainbow, like I said, Rainbow Rising for me is just, I can always listen to that album and hear something that I didn't pick up before. And his slide playing's amazing as well, you know? Like that's another whole thing. People get into the technical stuff he was doing, but great slide player, great writer, you know.
I saw them on that tour when they first came. I saw them at Newcastle City Hall and met them all.
Oh, wow.
And I met Richie, and I was, bear in mind, I was only 16, 17 at the time. And he came out and he signed a couple of autographs, and I said, he smashed his guitar that night.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I wish you hadn't smashed that guitar. I says, I would have loved to have had that, you know. And he said, oh, they're giving away all my Stratocasters at Julie's nightclub, which is a nightclub down by the Newcastle quayside.
Wow.
And I actually believed him. I believed him.
I would have believed that at that age.
Yeah.
I just would have been like, okay, Mr. Blackmore, I'll see you there.
Well, I went down, me and a friend went down and hung around outside this nightclub that we were too young to get in. And then realized he's just, you know, donkey's ears.
Yeah.
It was like a load of crap. But I actually got in to meet the rescue, and I spent about 20 minutes talking to Ronnie Dio.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Who was drawing pictures of hats on Richie Blackmore on my program. I was asking about that hat that Richie, you know, the Quaker hat sort of thing, you know. He's got to be in this sort of thing. Yeah. And I just chucked that program away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You could sell that on eBay now, couldn't you?
Oh man, just want to put it up on the wall. That'd be amazing.
You know, it was the tour manager was from my hometown anyway, Colin Hart.
Okay, right. I've heard that name before.
Yeah, Colin Hart. Yeah, he was working with Deep Purple from '71. Then he went with Richie to Rainbow. Then he came back to Purple.
Right.
So you know how that. It was great. It was a great, you know, 1976. That was Newcastle City Hall. I seen Rainbow every time they came, actually.
Yeah, what a great band. Yeah. Oh man,
fantastic. And Richie, I would say Richie was, if you caught him on a bad night, he was awful. But if you caught him on a good night, there's nobody better.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's so nobody better. Well, on that night of reminiscences, I feel like when he just kind of started to get going. So if you'll have us again, Steve, we would love to have you back on.
Anytime.
Maybe once your amp is out in the wild and we can talk about it and hear some sound examples and things like that. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Where can people find out more about what you do?
I have a website, Root, ROOT-TWO, root2.co.uk. And I tend not to keep it up to date too much because I'm so busy with other things. Also, with the Geordie thing, you see, I'm splitting my time between it, and Geordie's becoming very active this month.
Right.
So I'm starting rehearsals next week. So yeah, I mean, like I say, I tend not to be too hot on the marketing. Mm-hmm. It's not my forte, if you know what I mean.
I feel you. Me too.
Facebook page, you know, sort of thing. Again, they'll probably, if they go there, they'll probably find this interview.
Yeah. Well, hopefully people can, if they enjoy this and they enjoy your insights and they enjoy some of the things that you've designed that we've talked about today, that they'll no doubt enjoy what you're about to come out with. So to everybody watching and listening, go and check out Root 2. And Steve, thank you so much, mate. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Actually, I'm quite surprised that you didn't touch on the Astoria range.
Well, maybe that's exactly what we need to talk about on part 2. And that was my swan song at Marshall, the story of it, and I'm particularly proud of that one. And that's actually what I use at the moment.
I was going to ask you that too. Well, yeah, we'll definitely part 2. We'll come back. So leave that as the taster, the teaser for everybody else. They'll be clamoring on it in the comment section.
Exactly. Awesome. All right, guys, I have to go. Steve, thank you so much. It was lovely to do this. I'll be in touch once this is all edited and out, and we'll stay in touch. And yeah, we need to
absolutely
have your stories. And thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Great to meet you guys.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you get to make some loud guitar noises.
I certainly will.
And for everyone else, thank you so much for listening in again, and we'll catch you next week on the Gear Podcast.